is Silent, and today I'm gonna be reading you some horror stories I found interesting on Reddit. If I voice crack, if anything, just let me know in the comments below, and I'll see it to it that you get a like on your comment, or anything. But yeah, anyway, here's the first story. I hate clowns, and here's why. So when I was around the age of 10, I decided that I was old enough to go to the park by myself. I could ride my bike there if I wanted to, but I've always been too scared. That day I decided otherwise. "Mom, I'm gonna go to play outside," I yelled to my mother, and she replied with, "Okay, sweetheart, be safe." This was normal since I would just play in the front yard, but today I thought otherwise. I got my bike out of the garage and headed to the park, which is a wooden park with trees. Only people who run like to go there. But I didn't care. Once I got there, I locked my bike on the bike rack and started walking. I looked older than I was. I'd been mistaken as a 15-year-old once. Crazy, right? Always as I was walking, I started to feel uneasy, like someone was watching me or something. I shrugged it off and kept walking anyway. I never thought I could be so stupid. I was walking, I thought I heard a twig snap, so I turned around to see nothing. Then I realized I was feeling uneasy. I wanted to turn around and walk/run to my bike, but since the playground was so close, I decided against it. Once I got there, I felt horrible, like I was gonna throw up, but I swallowed it down. The playground was run down and old with graffiti all over. I don't know why I liked it so much, but I got on the swing and started swinging when I heard a voice behind me. "Hey, little girl, what are you doing here all alone?" I turned around to see about 15 feet away from me was a tall, lanky man dressed as a clown. Personally, I didn't mind clowns, but this one made my stomach drop. I was terrified. By terrified, I mean I was shaking. He chuckled and smiled. "Well, little lady, I suppose you don't like to talk, huh?" He asked another question, which I couldn't answer. That's when he started walking over, so I jumped off the swing and then ran so fast I almost tripped like 100 times. I couldn't believe it was happening before my very eyes. This crazy guy was chasing me, and that's when he pulled out a knife, and I ran faster than I ever thought I could. Once I saw my bike in sight, I ran and ran and ran until I remembered that I had locked it. So I ran up to it. I knew the code by heart and pulled it out. This guy was within 5 feet of me when I got onto my bike. He touched my shoulder, and then I sped off to my house. I got in trouble for leaving the property, but I never told any of my family what happened that day, and I don't think I'll ever will. And here comes story 2. The man outside the window. Okay, when I was around the age of 10, my family moved out, but we were homeless for about a month due to some complications. But anyway, we stayed at one of our friends' house. They didn't really live in the nicest neighborhood, but it was an offer we couldn't refuse because we were homeless. So that day I got there, I rolled out my sleeping bag right next to the window. I was used to sleeping on the floor anyways, so I was fine. Once it was time to go to bed, I was the only one who slept up in the living room, right by the window, that you can see the street as clear as day, acceptably because there is street lights that flicker. I was used to this kind of stuff by now. Around 3 a.m. I wake up to the sound of tapping on the window. I open my eyes to see some crazy dude staring right back at me. I almost peed my pants, no joke. In instinct, I scream in his face. His face turns into a groan and looks down, but when he looked back up, he had a smile from ear to ear. I screamed again. This time the mother of my friend came out. I told her everything and she called the cops, and they said when they were investigating, the side of the house door was unlocked. And if the mother didn't come, he could have been in the house. Now it's time for the final and longest story. monsters in my brother's room. Can you check the closet one more time? My little brother Mason asked as he shuffled underneath his covers. I rolled my eyes but continued towards his closet with a plastic baseball bat over my shoulder. I didn't flourish with my weapon and quickly opened the door, aiming the tip of the bat inside. See? Nothing, per usual. I assured him. He whimpered a bit, but I could check every corner of his room 1,000 times, but he'd never be convinced. Alright, I checked under the bed, the desk, in the closet, the toy box. It's lights out, man, I said as I set the bat at his bedside. Mason let out a relieved sigh and finally nestled into his bed. I turned to exit his room, flipping the lights on my way out, and turned around one more time to make sure he was okay. Good night, loser, I called out to him, and he chuckled. Good night, Will. Yawning all the way through. I went around our house to make sure everything was locked up. Our dad is a security guard at the nearby plant, yet he works a lot of nights, so it's up to me to take care of everything while he's away. Mom died while giving birth to Mason. I was only 8, but I remember my mom being sick for a long time. My dad wasn't doing great after that, but he eventually pulled himself together. It has been 6 years of us, just us boys. But we do our best. My dad works hard to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table, so taking care of my little brother while he's away is the least I can do. Mason is a great kid. Sure, he can get on my nerves sometimes, but I'd do anything for him. I'd fight off all the monsters with that plastic old bat to keep a smile on his face. After my walkthrough, I finally sank into my bed. I thought about all the little things that happened that day. Dad making breakfast sandwiches for us in the morning, my friends talking about girls in their class. Mason showed me pictures he'd drawn of all of his dreams. The thoughts swirled in my head, and a memory of my mom humming a gentle tune lulled me to sleep. I awoke in the middle of the night to find small hands clinging to my shirt. No matter how many monster checks I do, Mason will sometimes sneak in my bed. I was too tired to shoo him away. I wouldn't do any good anyway, so let it be. Before I knew, the alarm on my phone was blaring in my room. I struggled to wake up, but I had a job to do. I looked at my bed to find it empty. Mason must have gone back to his room. I lifted myself up and got ready, and stepped over to his room to find it empty. Mason, I called out. It was quiet. I'll bet the light snoring coming from my dad's room. I walked towards the kitchen to find Mason seated at the dining table, scribbling on some paper. I ruffled his mess of curly hair brown. What's up, Picasso? His focus was unwavered as he continued to draw. I glanced at what he was so intently working on. The white paper was filled with green zigzags, depicting grass, a bright yellow sun on the corner of the sheet, 4 stick figures with large round heads appearing to be holding hands, and a 5th stick figure in the sky next to what looked like clouds. Who's that? I asked as I gathered our things for school. I heard his finger tapping on his artwork. This is Dad, you, my friend, his mom, and me, he exclaimed. Oh, trying to set up Dad with someone, I teased. He laughed. Yeah, she said she likes your dad. I handed him his backpack. Sounds like a good idea. The old man hasn't seen anyone in ages. We both walked towards the front door. Maybe a new little brother wouldn't be too bad, I said as I tousled his hair again. Our school packs all the grades into one building, so Mason and I take the same bus. I greeted my friend as I sat down with my brother. Mason just stared out the window as we made our way to school. I spent a portion of the day thinking about which friend Mason was referring to. As far as I knew, he usually kept to himself all day. I eventually shrugged it off. I didn't think Mason would think about having a mom, but I suppose it can be weird seeing other kids with theirs. It's just been us 3 for a long time, and things have been completely fine. The long day finally came to an end. I met Mason on the school bus, and we talked about what to eat for dinner. When we got home, my dad's car was already gone. I was hoping we'd catch him for a minute, but Mason didn't seem to mind. As soon as we got inside the house, Mason rushed for his room. I was ahead of my schoolwork, so I decided to whip up dinner. When I reached into our freezer, to grab a box of dino-shaped chicken nuggets, I heard whispering coming from down the hall. Yeah, I heard what he said this morning. But Mason's voice trailed off. But your mom said no. There was a bit of unease in his voice as he continued to whisper. Don't be mad. I just don't want anyone to get in trouble. I called out to him, you good, dude? I could hear him jump up onto his feet and rush towards me. He immediately seated himself at the dining table and began with crayons and paper. I wasn't sure what to think. After setting some dino nuggets into the oven, I asked, so who were you talking to over there? My question was met with silence. Hey man, is everything alright? I looked over at Mason was furiously scribbling on his paper. I walked over and set gaze on what he was so focused on. His paper had a house made of simple square and triangles. His hand was shading the whole sheet with a dark red crayon. I placed my hand on his shoulder. Easy, killer, you're gonna tear a hole in your paper. Mason's hand finally stopped and he looked up at me. Maybe it was the lightning, but I swear his eyes were completely black for a split second. It's our house, he said wistfully. I'm not sure why I suddenly felt so cold. Oh yeah? What's with all the red stuff? I asked. A fire, he whispered. Mason's answer sent a chill down my spine. And at that moment I suddenly caught a whiff of smoke. I turned towards the kitchen to see a light wisp of gray seeping out of the oven. I snapped back to reality, rushed over. Our dinner had turned into burnt crisps. Shit, I muttered under my breath. I swear, I had just placed the food into the oven. I looked at the clock on the microwave and see that it had 30 minutes had passed. My mind had begun to whirl. It didn't make any sense. I looked up towards the dining table to find it empty. Mason, I called out into the hall. My little brother emerged from his room. He had a confused expression. What happened? Is dinner ready yet? My head began to ache and I pinched the bridge of my nose. After a moment I composed myself. Yeah, I messed up. How about some PB&J instead? Mason acted normal the rest of the night. He ate his dinner, watched some TV, and played with some toys. I was left in a daze. I still had goosebumps from what happened earlier. I kept looking at my brother, seeing if I could catch a glimpse of something altering in him. For a moment I felt like I was going crazy, but I was so sure I had seen his eyes change. Hours soon passed. It was getting late. I was finally getting to the point of shrugging off what happened when Mason asked me to check for monsters in his room. I lifted the trusty plastic bat, and as I started to do my usual check, I asked, you talk about these monsters, where do you think they come from? He was quiet but kept his gaze on me as I continued my rounds in his room. His voice pierced the silence. They crawl out when I'm sleeping. He caused me to pause and my attention shifted to him. I assumed they were people, but they looked so terrifying that they must be monsters. Mason's face began to twist in terror. They all come out of the closet and from under my bed. They say they want to take me. They want me to be like them. Small streams of tears began to flow down Mason's cheeks. I dropped the bat and rushed to his side. It's okay, I won't let anything bad happen to you. I tried to console him. His voice was finally filled with fear. Sometimes late at night, when you're asleep, they get so close. Their hands are so cold it hurts my skin. I couldn't stand seeing him like that, so I pulled him in for a hug. He continued, I told Dad. I told him I didn't want to sleep anymore. Then he told me a story about the lady. Dad told me that the lady would come to protect me and you. Memories began to flood into my mind. I asked, does the lady have long brown hair and light blue eyes? Mason sniffled and nodded his head. He got out of my hug and looked up at me and started to hum a song. Not just any song. It was the one my mom used to hum to me. A lump formed in my throat, and my chest started to ache. Did Dad tell you about that song too? He wiped his face and shook his head. No. The lady comes and hums that to me. Help me get back to sleep. My mind went blank. I felt a rush of cold run through me. I snapped, that's enough, Dad's here. I'm here. We're enough to protect you. We don't need anyone else, just us. A loud creak sounded from outside the door. I turned to see the closet door. I looked back at Mason, his eyes wide and mouth gaping. Before I could ask him what's wrong, he whispered, as if not wanting to alarm an animal, I see them everywhere. No one else can see them, but they are clearly in my sleep. But they are really clear in my sleep. He pulled the blanket over his head and said, "My friend didn't like you saying that." I forcefully swallowed the lump in my throat and said, "You've been talking about your friend. Is he here right now?" A voice came up next to my ear, not in front of me where Mason was, but it was a voice that said, "Good night." I couldn't get any more from Mason, so I let him be. I sat the bat at his bedside and told him good night as I turned the lights off. I retreated into my room, sunk into my bed, and just stared up at the ceiling. My thoughts from what Mason said kept me up a bit that night. I kept my door open just to make sure I could hear him. Nothing else happened. And then my alarm blared. Morning came before I knew it. The day that followed was uneventful and normal, but Mason seemed quieter than usual. I tried to pull him out of whatever he was going through, but it seemed like he was keeping me at arm's length. Eventually, he stopped asking me to check for monsters. Dark bags began to form under his eyes. He seemed lifeless. One night, as we were finishing up some show on TV, I finally confronted him about it. "Mason, you haven't been yourself lately. What's going on?" I seemed that he was at a breaking point. I began sobbing. "My friend, he really got angry at what you said the other night. He was shaking. He's so mad. He sent the lady away and told me that if he can't get what he wants, he'll just steal it." "What does he want?" I asked. Mason wiped his tears and said he wants our family. He said he wanted what I took from him. "But it's okay. If I stay awake, he can't get me. If I stay awake, he can't steal my face." Fear and anger began to clash inside of me, but one stood victorious. "Go to sleep. I don't want to hear any more of these fucking stories," I snapped. Mason, of course, looked heartbroken, but before he could utter another word, I shouted, "Go to sleep, enough." I stormed out of his room and slammed the door behind me. Once I got through the threshold of my room, I pushed my door to hear another. What? Hold on. I stormed out of his room and slammed the door behind me. Once I got through the threshold to my room, I pushed my door to hear another smack from it closing. Mason's crying, and he cried until he finally went quiet. I was sure that he was asleep. It's strange how quickly sleep can take you when you fully surrender yourself. I wanted to forget the day had happened, and for tomorrow to bring everything back to normal. I closed my eyes and pushed everything to the back of my mind. At some point during the night, I awoke to the light pitter-pattering of feet. My bed slumped one side, and I felt a small body curled up next to me. The familiar small hands hugged me tightly. I didn't shoo him away. I wrapped my arm around him. I was glad he could forgive me for snapping at him earlier. I laid my hand on his head, but something was wrong. My hand brushed against a mass of coarse, brittle hair. The small hands quickly snatched my wrist and my skin ached from how cold these hands were. I opened my mouth and let out a yelp of pain, but from outside of my room through the hallway, I could hear Mason screaming at the top of his lungs. My heart sank. It was too dark to see anything, but whatever this was beside me was not Mason. I tried to lift myself off the bed, but the hands gripped tighter, pulling me back. It felt as though my skin was freezing up my bones. Whatever was holding on to me wasn't letting go. So I raised my right leg and smashed into it. The impact was followed by a shriek, by a sickening crack that made my stomach turn. I continued to stomp on it, all while the Mason screams went on and on. I fell backwards onto my ass, the grip of this thing having finally released. I was hoping this was all just some kind of nightmare, but the burn on my wrist was way too real and too painful to be just a dream. I stumbled out of my room. I'd never heard those screams come out of Mason, and they were getting louder and louder. But his scream was the only thing echoing through the hallway. A myriad of anguished groans filled my ears. When I finally got to Mason's room, I flung the door open to see it filled with what I can only describe as the souls of the damned. The men, women, and children, all barely distinguishable, piled atop each other into a writhing mass of rotten meat, their long, skinless fingers stretching towards my little brother. The air was filled with a sickly sweet smell of decay. I took a step inside the room. A few of them turned their attention towards me before I could react. Two of them what appeared to be a man whose empty eye sockets oozed a black ichor, and a young girl with a crooked neck grabbed hold of me. Their hands touching the exposed skin of my arms caused me to shout in agony. They began to pull me down. My knees gave out, and a loud squish could be heard. Another body, then another pulled me further down. Will. That voice, that faint voice that called me for years. The voice that belonged to one person that depended on me to fight monsters away. I lifted myself up, the weight of the innumerable putrid bodies continuing to push me down. I let out a cry, one filled with fear and determination, and the thought of my brother gave me the strength to pull myself up towards the surface. I crawled forward towards Mason's bed. I could feel the skin in the palms of my hands sizzle as I used the other poor souls as leverage. My aching hands finally felt the familiar cushion of Mason's bed. I used every ounce of strength to lift myself onto the bed. I sat atop the bed alongside Mason. He sat in a fetal position, clenching the baseball bat to his chest. I rested a hand on his back to assure him that everything was going to be okay, even though I wasn't sure what I could possibly do. I pulled the bat from him and propped it over my shoulder and shouted at what now looked like an endless sea of putrid flesh, "Get the hell out of here, leave my brother alone." Will, I heard the voice ringing in my ears, and I readied myself to defend Mason. A body began to pull itself onto the bed, but my resolve quickly wavered, looking up at me with eyes that I know all too well were Mason's, except it wasn't. This Mason had long, wild hair. His eyes were set aside, a face that was nothing but exposed meat. His mouth was open to show rows of yellow rotten teeth, and it retched up towards me. I heard Mason's voice call from behind me. "He wants me, Will. He wants to take my body and live my life. He wants our family." I didn't believe him at first, but I definitely believe him now. I grabbed Ty onto the bat, and with all my might I cracked the bat at the side of the monster's head, again and again until I woke up. The light of morning sun cracked through my window. I looked around, and sure enough, I was in my room. And yet it all felt so surreal. My whole body was aching. I looked down at my arms to see faint red marks on them. I couldn't help but think it was all really just a dream. I groggily opened my door to hear the sound of sizzling meat coming from the kitchen. The once pleasant smell made me want to vomit. I limped to the dining room table and heard a confronting warning from my dad. He was preparing some breakfast sandwiches for us. I slumped into the chair and rested my head on the table. "Are you alright there, champ?" he asked, as he set a plate of food in front of me. I groaned and pushed the plate aside. "Yeah, just a really bad dream." He sat beside me and put his hands on my shoulder. "Yeah, I used to have them all the time." I looked at him and asked what kind of dreams. He took a deep breath and told me about nightmares he had right after Mom died. She was reaching out towards him in the dark. "Your brother was in them too," Dad said under his breath. I would say with a wave of confusion, You mean Mason?" A solemn expression was plastered on Dad's face. "No, you see, Mason was a twin. Meaning you had another brother, but he didn't make it." I thought I was going to lose it right then and there. Before I could say anything, Mason emerged from his room. He sat down at the table, and without a word, scarfed down the food in front of a little man long time no see. Dad said as he tousled Mason's head. Mason laughed and looked at me with a beaming smile for a moment. Just a brief second, I saw his eyes turn black. Well, that was a lot of scary stories that, kind of freaked me out too. But, yeah. Yeah, so hopefully you guys enjoyed that, and, let me know if you guys want some more in the comments, and leave a like, really helps me out with all these stories, and yeah. I will be posting one of these every day, maybe. So, yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.